After a 5 week journey in John, we're back to the Gospel of Mark. And Mark, again, is the Gospel that was written first, and it does not have Jesus being widely known. It's not to the very end of Mark that people realize that Jesus is even more special than they think. Whereas John, right up front, in your face, no question, he's the Messiah. So we're coming back to a time of secrets, a time when people are not exactly sure what's going on. They just know that Jesus is something that is really, really attractive. And so we read in the gospel today about how the Pharisees had come up from Jerusalem to confront Jesus again. This is not the first time they have confronted him. This is kind of a regular deal in Mark, that the establishment wants to confront Jesus being problem maker, challenging them. And they come into the room where his disciples are, and the first thing they do is have a fit because the disciples are eating, and to the best of the Pharisees' knowledge, they didn't wash their hands. How many of us have had a church experience where something merely profound is going to happen and someone ruins it by having a fit that the teapot was put back in the wrong place? I've actually had that experience. Or you're really excited about a new project and someone says, well, we've never done it that way before. And that automatically means it's canceled. I've had that experience too. In fact, there's nothing more deadly in church land than the phrase, we've never done it before. The Pharisees were paying attention to things that really didn't matter. And Jesus, in his way, tried to point that out to him, to them when they came. They were, on their riding their high horse of indignation, superiority, and being able to finally being able to cast Jesus' followers aside as being nothing but defiled individuals who had no respect for tradition, no understanding of why we did things. And Jesus turns it on them and says, Isaiah talked about folks like you. Talked about folks who pay lip service to church, who, show up, go and do their thing, attend the special services, volunteer on the committees, but it's not in your heart. And how many people are in the pews that fit that description? How many people claim to be Christian and fit that description? And Jesus goes on to say, it's not the stuff that goes into us that defiles us. It's the stuff that comes out of us that defiles us. Guilt, greed, envy, the seven deadlies, essentially, is what Jesus was talking about. What comes out of us? Because it's not that we can be made unclean or unworthy by the things that we do, the things we handle. And this is really hard to listen to in a class society where we have upper class people and lower class people, especially in North America where we pretend class doesn't exist. At least, you come to countries like India and Pakistan, they're honest about their class system. They recognize that there are people on the bottom rungs and people on the higher rungs, and they know that. England as well. We in North America pretend that we don't look down on the ones who do dirty jobs, but we do. They might not smell as pretty as we do. They might not dress as well as we do. So when they come into a church sanctuary, we look at them like, why are you here? This is for good people. This is for people who clean up, who know how to clean up. This is for people who sit down and listen to what's being said to them and don't cause a ruckus. And if they're going to be gossip, it's going to be far enough away that it's not going to be traced back to them immediately. And they're going to make sure that their opinion is known, but they're going to do it in such a way that it seems like it's nice. Jesus was talking about these people. These people who will complain about refugees but won't do anything to help. The people who will say, oh, it's an absolute shame that veterans are not treated as well as they can. But why should my money go to support more people in PTSD when I wasn't the cause of it? It's everywhere. Society encourages it. And the Jewish culture, specifically in their food rituals, tried to be aside from culture. They tried to be something different from culture. They tried not to give in to the classism. They tried to equal the setting for everybody. That it didn't matter who you were. How you went about preparing for a meal was something everybody did. The foods you chose. You might be able to have a whole calf. You might not be able to have anything more than a small lamb. But the requirements for the slaughtering of those animals and the cooking and the care of those animals was the same for everybody. That was the intention. That was one of the reasons behind having rules. It was so that everybody could come to God on an equal footing. But it didn't take long for the rules to be seen as harnesses and impediments and basically flogs for the people. You do these rituals or else. If you don't clean your kitchen properly, well, then you're not acceptable to God. If you eat something that is not considered kosher, then you're not acceptable to God. And these rules that had started out trying to equalize everybody's experience soon came to be a burden. And when Jesus quotes Isaiah saying, you people speak out, you want to do the religiosity of our faith, but you don't want to actually have faith. It's a message that we can hear too, because it's not just the Pharisees that have passed that judgment. Jesus was showing that it really didn't matter how people ate and what they ate. And it's one of the first arguments that Christian church got into, actually, and it was settled when Peter and Paul were still alive. In the book of Acts, it talks about the council in Jerusalem in the year 50 CE, where they were discussing what is appropriate to eat and what is not. Because following Jesus' teaching that anything should be eaten, nothing coming into the body defiles it, Paul argued that they should throw out the food laws, but they should just eat the food that was available to them and not worry about it. Whereas the people who wanted to maintain their Hebrew culture, that was part of their identity. It was a pretty big deal. And they kept saying Jesus was Hebrew, so we had to continue on the way Jesus lived. And Jesus was, because Jesus ultimately came to us to kind of get our act together. So the church obviously sided with Paul, agreeing that not everybody needed to follow these food laws, and circumcision was discussed too, so not every Christian male had to be circumcised. But they had to get rid of these rituals and these rules and these expectations and these burdens that came with tradition right away. I mean, it was one of the things that was hampering their missionary work, was people encountering this. Jesus very clearly tells us that the stuff that we're not good about, the stuff that we need to cleanse out of our systems, that's already inside us. That's already in our heart. One of the things that drives me a little bit crazy, and I've made another video on my website about it, is this assumption of hell being a punishment place, and that if we break these laws or these expectations or these rules, then it's automatically going there. How burdensome is that to any followers of Jesus? And it's not something Jesus asked for. We as a society put these expectations on each other, but they're never the ones that are going to hinder us. So it's okay for a person who is comfortable to say, well, we're not going to have someone come into our space that isn't in clean clothes. But for a homeless person, that excludes them right away. They're out. They're out. It's okay for people who are able to walk into a church up 3 stairs and walk into the sanctuary and be there. The minute a handicapped person who can't move their crutches or canes or wheelchair up those stairs gets there, they're out. They're blocked. We say it's okay that everybody's part of the whole family of God. But then we put restrictions on who can be in leadership and who can't. So the single mother who needs to have daycare so she can help out at the church, she's blocked immediately. We put on rules. It's not just Isaiah identifying them or the Pharisees acting it out. This is something we continue to do in our congregations. We continue to put up these walls and restrictions and expectations that benefit those of us in power. If we're privileged, we already have all of these rules figured out that benefit us. We've had that figured out for generations. We inherited it. But if for some reason we stop being the privileged or something happens to us, suddenly how we are blocked by these rules and expectations becomes very real, becomes very personal and extremely problematic. Jesus said it's not what comes into the person, but what goes out of a person that defiles them. We defile ourselves when we set up barriers and boundaries for others. We defile ourselves when we don't listen to minority groups critiquing us and telling us where we need to improve. We defile ourselves when we parade around pretending we are the best Christians in the world, but do not act the way Christ wanted us to. And the good news in all of that is that we control what we do. We control what's in our hearts and our minds and our actions. We can change. We can take this story as a warning. Jesus recognized hypocrisy. In fact, it was the number one thing he preached against. Hypocrisy, capitalism, and greed. Those were his big three. And we have the power to do better, to be better, to not be examples of walking defilement. We can remove the rules that block out others so that we can make a community, help contribute to a community that truly does look like the family of God. We have that power. The question is, are we going to exercise it? Or are we just going to stay comfortable, nod a little bit and say, yeah, that was interesting, and go on with your life? Because then you become who Isaiah is talking about, the person that just goes through the motions of faith but doesn't actually live it.